What's up, YouTube? In this episode, we're going to be looking at Azure DevOps Release Pipelines. So in the previous video, I'll put a link to that over here, or previous two videos, both links up here. The first one showed you how to use Azure Git from Visual Studio in multiple ways. Hopefully you've created your projects by this point. In the second video, I showed you about how to create build pipelines. This is an automation feature available in Azure DevOps, where as soon as somebody checks in and commits to a certain branch, an automatic build process can take place. This build process could be a number of things. In the previous video, we used a certain project that had a database that it used and a bunch of unit tests that required the database as well. And of course, the entire system requires the database, and it also has a dependency on an external service. We didn't quite encounter that or didn't talk about that in the last one, but that is sort of a complexity as part of this project. Now, the release pipeline is actually two steps, right? Get the source code and deploy it. How hard can that be? But there are some complexities in the release pipeline, not necessarily because the release pipelines are complex. A typical project has a database, which means you have to deploy that database. Maybe you have to create a new database. Maybe you have to update the schema of the database and deploy an application. And there may be a sequence that you need to be concerned about. And those things add complexity. And it's not complex once you know it, but it might be surprising or complex for those who've never done this before. Nonetheless, let's get started with the release pipelines. So what we have here is our build pipeline. The project is slightly different. This is a .NET Core 3 project. I just was upgrading this project for a number of reasons. And here we are with the upgraded version. And now I'm going to have to create a release pipeline for this project. So it's a .NET Core 3 project. Not that that's really relevant, but that's why I've called it Core 3 here. It's slightly different from it's the same project. It's just been upgraded to .NET Core 3. Okay, so this pipeline is going to build. I'm just going to check some of the steps here. So this is one of the jobs that was completed, successfully completed, and it produced this artifacts. And these artifacts have been placed in a certain folder, and we'll have to know about this when we do our build pipeline, because that is effectively feeding into the release pipeline. And I'm going to go a little slow or step by step rather than just showing you this is what happened. I'm going to go through the process of building the pipeline so you understand what needs to be done in the build pipeline to support the release pipeline. So I'm going to go here to the release. All right, so before we can start or complete a release pipeline, of course, the release is deploying it somewhere to some service that you provision in Azure. So you need to have an app service or something that has been provisioned by you in your Azure account. And then you go to the DevOps account and create the release pipeline. And in my case, I need a database as well. So I need to make sure that a database server is provisioned. And then I'll use that database server to create my database and so on and so forth. So we're going to go through that process first here. So I have a database server provision. There's no database itself in there. It's just a server. And I will create a new app service for our little service here. I'm going to add this. And that's my subscription. And I'll use this resource group. I will select 3.0 on Windows, and code is not Docker. EastUS2. That's the plan. Now make sure, in my case, of course, I want it to be a free plan. It does typically pick a different plan that starts to cost you every month. So make sure you just get the free version, at least while you're playing around with this stuff. So I can see it's free. It also says F1 here. And so that's that. And what am I going to call this? I need to call this, let's call this movie service. Now stuff in Azure actually is case sensitive, so be careful about that. So it's going to be movieservice.azurewebsites.net. Create that. That'll take a few seconds. Then we go to the Azure DevOps side, and as we're building the release pipeline there, it's going to ask you a bunch of questions. At some point, we're going to have to authorize Azure DevOps, our Azure DevOps account, to be able to connect to our Azure account and use the resources and deploy to that in this case, the app service that we just created. Okay, so now it's being created here and it's underway. All right, so there's our app service that we just created, and we're going to deploy to this app service, and the URL is going to be that. We create a new release pipeline, and here I'm going to use a Azure App Service deployment. There's a bunch of other tasks you can select depending on what it is you're doing. You also have the cloud services. Most of my projects are Azure Cloud Services, which are the older style, but I know a lot of the new people are using Azure App Service, so I decided to use Azure App Service for this video, so it helps more people rather than fewer people. So I'm going to pick the Azure App Service deployment here, and I'm going to, that's fine, I don't need to change the name. I'm also going to add the artifact here, so the artifact is going to be from that DevOps project, and it's going to be from this repo, and it's going to be the latest version. I'm going to add that. And I also want to trigger this automatically every time a new build succeeds. So once the build has succeeded, I want then this code to be deployed to my provisioned app service. So I can just enable this here. It could be, there's other triggers you can add, but for now, the default is just enable it as soon as a build occurs, and it'll create a release for that. So that's now automated there. Let's look at the tasks here. So in Azure App Service, we have, I also need, actually, let me also just add that. I also need to deploy our database. I need the DACPack Azure SQL. So my database is an Azure SQL database. And I'm going to move this up before the actual application is deployed. So here we're going to have to set up the database. The schema is going to be created in that other database I had provisioned in my Azure account. So this might get a little complicated or confusing. So I'm going to try and go slow so nobody gets confused about what's going on here. Remember, this is tying back to our build pipeline where certain artifacts were placed in certain folders that the release can make use of it. All right. So over here, I'm going to pick the Azure subscription that I'm using for this whole thing. And my SQL, I'm using in this case SQL authentication. And the SQL server, the database server, remember the server we saw here. In fact, I might just get it from there. If you look here, I had a database server. So what it's asking me for is this server name. So I'm just going to copy that. Remember, this is not the database, this is the server. And the database is going to be created. I'm going to call it MovieDB. And it does have a login required. So I shall skip the password for now. The deployment type, I'm going to be using SQL DACPack. Remember in the build pipeline also, I talked about the fact that this DACPack is created and we use the DACPack to create an instance of localDB on the build server so that our unit tests could use that database. It's the same DACPack. Now, you can have n number of DACPacks, same DACPack, but there's a published profile. So I have a published profile that is for production. That means I'm not going to blow away the database if it's there. I'm going to wipe out all the data in production. So you could have different published profiles. There are those XML files that we created in the previous one. So the DACPack file is going to help me navigate to the build output where we dump the artifacts. So that's here. And this is looking for, what are we looking for? The DACPack. So the DACPack is over here under release. That's the DACPack. So I'm going to select that. So it's important when you create the build that you move these files in a place where you can then pick them, and find them. If you need something in the in the release pipeline, you have to make sure it's available or created in the build step so that the release can pick and choose from it. And I'll show you what I mean once we've just finished with this portion here, so I don't lose what I've done so far. The published profile is that XML file. So once again, it's here. And I have the production version of the, see that I've got two of them. One's a production, one's not production. So I'm using the production publish profile. And we don't need anything else. So once this is done, we can, the app type is app on Windows and app service name. What is going on? Oh, subscription. I need to pick the subscription. It doesn't know what app service to pick. Okay, so there it is. So I picked my subscription, and then of course it's going to show me my service. Okay, so now that's there. The stage one is hooked to that. All of this. My DAC pack has been set up to use the same subscription. We'll click on. Okay. If you've not done this before, it's going to ask you to authorize. So it's going to take you to the login in case you're using a different account for your Azure DevOps versus your Azure portal. Either way, even if you're using the same account, you do need to make the authorization. And once you made the authorization, it'll remember that. You don't have to keep doing that, but you've got to do that one time. Or maybe more than one time. I think per release pipeline that you create, if you're connecting to Azure, you need to authorize that release to do it once. All right. So, and then I've got my deployment here. So going back to a deployment, we're using the same subscription and the service name. It's just pick the same app service name. That's fine here. Oh, that app service name is there. So you can change the name if you want it here. It's using resource manager. It's using the subscription. It's using this app service. There's nothing to really configure here. It's just a setting. You're just picking what you want to use and deploy and where to deploy it. So this is, something is, So I'm going to do this, my password offline. So you close your eyes and I'll be back. All right. And now I'm going to save the release pipeline. All right, so once you've created the release pipeline and you've saved it, if you go into your releases here, you're going to see that. So you can name this if you want. You can edit the name, or you can edit other things about the release pipeline. So we're keeping the stages and the jobs simple, but you have in Azure DevOps, you have the ability to define certain pre and post deployment conditions, certain checks, certain gates. So you might want to say, I want to have these people sign off before it moves on to the next stage or before it gets deployed. And maybe it's the testers have to sign off on something in the QA, depending on what environment you're deploying from. So I'm not going to go through the details of that. I think the step one is to just get it all working. And then once it works, you can add on the features you want. So in this video, we're just going to be getting this thing to work. And that way I don't spend a whole lot of time talking about things maybe you're not interested in, right? So what I'm going to do here is simply, I can create a release. If there's a build that's available, I can say, okay, then just release it. But before we do that, I'm going to just show you in the pipeline for the build. Or maybe I should show you in the YAML itself, so it's easier to see. So in this YAML pipeline, there are a few things noteworthy here that I had to do in the build pipeline in order to support the release part. So towards the bottom. So once my tests have run, so my tests have succeeded and I've got the code coverage, that's my test. The next thing is to start publish and produce the artifacts that are going to be required for deployment, right? Because one is the actual application that it puts in a zip file, but I need that DAC pack available to me. I need that publish XML file available to me. That's not automatic. You have to do that. So here I have a task that copies the DAC pack to the staging directory, and I've given it the arguments to do that. And similarly, I need another one that copies the database publish profile to the staging directory, and that's where I publish the production.publish XML file. In my repo, I actually have two profiles. There's the production publish and there's so let's call the dev publish, if you will, right? So that's occurring there. The other thing that is important to understand is the configuration for, let's say, your database connection. When I'm on my local machine, I'm using a local database. When I'm on the build servers, it's using a local database that's deployed at that instant in time on the build servers. when I'm in production, I need to use a production server, right? So at least between the build and the production, the database connection strings are changing. And if you're not familiar with .NET's config system, it's very capable, very flexible, but that flexibility comes with a bunch of complexity or confusion. So I'm going to briefly hit upon certain things that are part of the .NET Core configuration system so that in case you're trying to do this in .NET Core, you don't get stumped. In ASP.NET Core, there is a environment variable that ASP.NET itself uses normally by default to determine whether you're in development environments or production environments and so on and so forth. So that variable is going to be available to you as part of your deployment in Azure as well, or you need to set that up. Okay, it's not going to happen by default. But the way it works in .NET Core is you have these app setting files, and there's a bunch of these here. As you can see, this is the sort of the default, and then there's the dev version, and then there's production version. Now by default, in ASP.NET Core, while you're developing an application, the setting has been set to development, right? So when you go to production, you need to set that setting to production, which means on your service, the deployment, you need to set that environment variable to production so that this whole config thing is going to work. And I'm going to show you these files so you can see the content, and that will hopefully make sense to you. So this is my app settings.json file, really which is just looking at this one connection thing. So this is the setting for the app settings.json. It's going to local DB projects v13. The dev version is the same, right? As I said, by default, ASP.NET is in development mode. That environment setting has been set to development mode. But the way config systems in .NET Core work is they're kind of hierarchical. Depending on what you load up first, whether you load up your environment variables, then you load up your .json files, or you do load up your JSON files first and then environment variables, they will overwrite each other, right? So if I have the same setting, you'll notice here also in the development, I only have the DB connection strings, since that's all I need to override, right? Whereas here, there is another setting. So basically, when it does the override or it'll do that merge, the setting from the dev and JSON will overwrite the setting in app settings.json, because in my configuration provider, I'm first loading up the add.json file app settings.json, and then I'm loading up the environment specific file. So as a result, I know that the app settings files settings will be overridden by either the development environment settings file or the production environments settings file. Okay. And so if I show you my production settings file, you can see it's going to this here, right? It's going to my Azure database. So, but it's going to go, in this case, going to override the thing, DB connection string settings. Hopefully that makes sense. It can be a little confusing, but you have to account for that, of course, in your design of your application. And then, of course, you have to make sure it works correctly in production, which means the setting that we're talking about here is called ASP.NET Core environment. Right? So this setting has n number of possible values, but by default, they use development on your local machine when you create a new project. And typically in production, you use production, but they could be n number of environments. Each of them have a different name. And maybe in each environment, your database is in a different location, which is very common actually. So you might have to have so many different ways to set up the values. In my case, I'm using the config file system to do that. There are plenty of other ways in Azure. You can use solely environment variables. And so for each environment, you can set up different setting values. But this setting does not exist by default in Azure. So I'm going to copy this setting. I'm going to go to my Azure account, my Azure portal account here. Go to that app service we just created, this one. And in this app service, I want to set that settings value to production. So I come in here to configuration under settings. There's a whole bunch of settings already there, but this setting is not there. Okay, in your case, maybe you want to make sure it's not there before you change it or add a new one. So I'm going to create a new setting. And that's the name. I'm going to call it production. All right. And then this UI is a bit weird because you think that OK would have done it, but you also have to do a save here. Okay, so here's the setting, and it's been set to the values hidden, and they tell you over here, this application settings are encrypted at rest and transmitted over an encrypted channel. You can choose to display them plain, blah, blah, blah. Application settings are exposed as environment variables for access by your application at runtime. Right? So it's setting an environment variable, and you have to save that, and then save checking again, and one more time. All right. Just to show you my code in the application, this thing is feeding off of the same environment variable, and based on the value, it chooses a file named appropriately, and then looks for that and loads that. So basically, after the app settings.json file is going to load up, let's say the app settings.production.json or app settings.development.json and so on. So these files, my development versus production settings, have different connection strings, one for my local database or the build service database, and the production for the production database, which is the database in Azure. So it's not on the same machine. It's a completely different database server. Okay, so we've done that. We have our release pipeline here. The pipeline is gone there. And in this pipeline, we have release, and here's a release. So we can just say create release, and it's going to go through that process of first deploying the database and then deploying the application, right? So I'm going to start this. It's just asking me for certain reasoning and whatever I might want to do here. I'm just going to say create. At this point, it kicks off the deployment. You can see it here. You can click on this to look at what's happening, sort of semi-live. And you can see it here. It's just attempting to connect to the agent. And once it starts, you'll see the output showing up in like a DOS-like window over here. All right. So now it's downloading the artifacts from the repo, and then this DAC pack. So of course I'll forward this whole thing, but I'll show you some of the output here because just so you can see it happening live. And then I'll, with the magic of editing, I'll forward it, and I'll see you in a minute or in a second. Now, while this is still getting its release done, I just want to explain the whole, not explain, but I guess I'm not sure how many people know about the database projects and how to use them. So I'm making an assumption in these videos that you have worked with the Visual Studio database projects. You've deployed databases using the publish XMLs and stuff like that. The database projects can also get you diffs. So typically in production, you're not using that publish XML file. You're using a diff script, which the database project itself can create for you based on your new schema. Let's say you made a release last month or last week, and you made changes to your database schema, and now you got a slightly different schema. The database projects can get you a diff between the previous release and this release, or kind of state of the database schema, and you can use that script to run as part of your deployment pipeline rather than deploying an entire database from scratch. You can say, okay, now that I have a database, I'm just going to keep providing you with update scripts, and it's going to execute the update scripts and update your database. So it's totally up to you. It's not, you're not republishing your database each time. All right, so it's finished. Everything has succeeded. The deploy to Azure App Service task will also show you at the bottom somewhere the actual link you can go to from here. Of course, you know the link from your Azure account, but this is in Azure DevOps. So you can just click from here. In this case, control click. That'll open up a web page. And hopefully if this page shows up the home page, then our database has been created. Database connectivity is established. Connectivity to our external service is also been established. And the next step is to show you, there we are. So the data here is coming from an external service, all the stuff that has got proper names of movies, let's say. And then the last 10, these things are coming from the database. So what I would like to do now is, hopefully, if this is what it's doing, if I create a new record in the database through some means, then we should see it here. So let's say we create a new movie 11 and with some title, and it should just appear when I refresh this page because this part is coming from the database. So I'm going to use Postman for that. That'll take 10 minutes to start up. Not really. It actually starts on my machine pretty quickly. So I'm going to use that service. Before I use Postman, let me show you here itself. If I went API/movies, I'll see a bunch of movies. It's the same thing. This is the JSON version of it. The first 50 odd movies come from a service, and the next ones are coming from my database. All right. Now, and there's another API to create movies and so on. So I'm going to use this API to actually create the movie. So here, I'm going to paste in that. I'm going to make sure this is a post. And the movie will look something like this JSON. So let me just pull this JSON out here. And then the body. So the title, let's call it Azure DevOps Build Release Pipeline. Make a movie on that. And I just concatenate all of this. Not that it matters if you're not seeing this data on that page. That's the name of the image. Okay, and this is, should we make this sci-fi or should we make it drama? Let's make it drama. The drama of Azure DevOps Release. And this is in the year 2020. All right, so I've set it to post. I should probably also set up the headers for application JSON. Okay, that's correct. If I hit send and if this succeeds, then we have a 200 OK, which means it succeeded. A new movie has been created. We can confirm that by looking over here. It should probably be like 11 with our 2020 movie. So if I refresh this, there's it. There's a new movie we just created. So we know that this is that production server, since it's all happening through the application and it's not something local. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because it's very easy to make a mistake. It's very easy to be hitting or pointing to the wrong database, especially when you have n number of environments before you get to production. You could basically make that mistake. So here you can confirm even by going to Azure DevOps and looking at the data in the database to see and make sure that you're going to the right place. But of course, there are many other checks and balances you can put in real world applications with regards to making these kind of mistakes. But the highlight I want to bring up is database connections, config settings, and such as per the ASP.NET environment variable, and use that and set that up in your service here, like I've done the ASP.NET Core environment. And that'll make your lives a lot easier because you might have n number of environments, and each environment may have completely different, or should have, should have completely different database connection strings. So at no point are you crossing environment boundaries to go to hit a database that's not in the actual environment. So I hope you enjoyed this video. It was a bit more complex, I think, than the release pipeline, than the build pipeline. But that's the nature of release pipelines. And of course, I was also trying to highlight to you the dependency on the build pipeline and what you may have to do in the build pipeline to support your release pipeline. And the fact that you need an Azure account, you need an Azure portal account, you need to provision a service before you can start deployment on the deployment side, right? So I'm going to put the links to any code that I might have to show you, not necessarily code, but if I can get the YAML for the release pipeline, then I'll put that there in the description, and the links to the previous 2 videos is up here. So thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please give me a thumbs up. Please subscribe. Please hit the notify button, and I will see you next time.